I've watched a interesting variety of movies because of this. There are movies there are movies I wouldn't normally watch that I've been able to, and it's actually been good. I've actually really enjoyed that. It's been really cool to, I mean, even movies that I don't think are, let's say, great movies or movies that I would normally be inclined to watch, there's still something I get out of watching them.
Yeah, that's why I feel about this movie.
Yeah, I feel that way about this movie too.
Welcome. You are entering a strange realm. A realm of what ifs. What if movies, television shows, and video games were better, worse, bizarrer, or downright different? What might they look like? Find out on today's episode of CineCasters.
Hello, and welcome to CineCasters, the show where we watch movies, analyze them, and take them apart and try and figure out how you could remake them to get the most out of the story and the content and the characters to make a, hypothetically, more interesting movie. I am Nate Draper, and I'm joined as always by Janglez.
That's right. I love it. That was a great intro. I like how you didn't even say necessarily better, just like more interesting.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I'm trying to find the way, because better is so subjective, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, even more interesting is more subjective, but I'm trying to stay away from this strict dichotomy of good and bad.
Yeah, I always say like there's always craft. Like you can always come back to this is well made, right? Like they understood the craft, they just didn't land the direction of the story, right? Actually, You know what? That's a great example of this movie.
I was going to say, that's the perfect segue for this week's movie, which is the Happytime Murders that came out in 2018.
Because over the credits, you get to see how they did all the puppeteering, like just a little sample.
Yeah, exactly.
And
You're talking about the very end.
This looks so good. It's so funny. And like they look like they're having a blast just puppeteering these puppets. And I'm like, I kind of want to watch.
It looks like a fun movie to work on.
I kind of want to watch the behind the scenes more than I want to watch this movie.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I definitely got that impression watching the credits where I went, they all look like they're having a great time. This looks like it was a really fun set to be on.
Yeah, it looks amazing. That being said,
I don't know if you've heard what Steven Spielberg has to say about fun sets, though.
Oh, I haven't.
They make bad movies.
Yeah, he might be right.
Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree.
That's not necessarily true.
Extent.
I mean, I think when Spielberg says fun sets, he means sets that have like a certain degree of like chaotic fun about them.
Yeah.
Because I do think when you go to work, and work can be fun, but it's not the same as play.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So where he's coming from with that is he said that in response to a movie called, what was it? 1945. It was a World War II movie that he made that everyone has correctly forgotten about. It's actually, you know what? It's actually kind of charming. I don't think it's as terrible as everybody makes it out to be. But he says, Jaws was miserable to make, and it was a great movie.
Yeah.
In 1945 was so much fun to make, and it was a terrible movie.
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain attitude. It's a fine balance, because I mean, like when I'm filming, I don't want it to be like, some days it's work and some days you got to like just slog through it. But it doesn't have to be a downer.
But anytime you've filmed, I've always felt like, okay, this is work. Like we can't just goof off. There's a clear goal in mind, so there's work to be done. But I've never not had fun. It's just not play. It's not the same as when we do CineMasters. I love CineMasters, but there's a goal in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Or CineCasters, I should say. When we do the podcast, it's fun. Yeah, exactly. Like we sit down and we go, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about a particular goal, and it's fun, but it is work. We are analyzing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we put work into preparing for it too. It's not like we just show up and talk out of our ass,
which we could do. We do usually do that before and after.
Yeah, exactly. There's enough of that laced into it that we get to experience that, but it's not the substance of why we're here.
Yeah. So with this movie,
with
this movie, I feel like I was really intrigued by the idea of the movie. Because I love Avenue Q. It's one of my favorite musicals, and I felt like this was Avenue Q by way of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. It is very Roger Rabbit-esque.
And so I was really, really into it. My biggest problem with this is I didn't even mind the shock humor.
I actually really enjoyed the shock humor.
Well, you remember we did, over a year ago, we did Sausage Party? Mm-hmm. And I really did not like the shock humor in that. Mm-hmm. I liked the shock humor in this.
Interesting. I was wondering how you were going to respond, because I was thinking back to Sausage Party, and I remember that there were some scenes in that you felt were
too much,
were unnecessary.
Yeah. But in this,
and rightly so. I think that's a very valid criticism to have.
But in this, I never had that problem. I thought it was super funny, especially because they're puppets, so they got ridiculous with it. I also loved the fact that everybody treated it on screen super seriously. So when people, whenever the puppets are dismembered or shit like that, everyone's like, "Oh my god, it's disgusting!" And there's just fluff everywhere. And I was like, the fact that they leaned into the absurdity of puppets being alive and people is really, really funny. And it works. It's funny. There's a lot of sexual jokes. The physical sexual jokes are funny. The the dialogue jokes I found were mostly miss with me.
I agree. I thought there were a lot of moments in it where I went, why who thought this was funny? This was not funny. But there are other so one specific moment that I loved was when they find the puppet washed up under the bridge.
And they ring him
and they're
out.
You should look away. Yeah, and then they ring him out. I was like, oh, that's great. That's so funny.
I gotta say, I know it's ridiculous, and I do think it goes on for maybe a little too long. But the silly string when he's
I love that
ejaculating in the office.
It's awesome.
Funny. It's so
I thought that was funny too.
I do think it goes on for a little too long. But the fact that it's silly string, one of the things that I love about this humor is you're in on the joke. You know the joke. It's not as though we're making a joke and it's it's puppets, but it's also sex. It's no, it's puppets and it's sex, and it's silly string, and they're gonna milk it. No pun intended.
Yeah. Good one.
They're gonna have fun with that, and they're gonna be it's silly string, and that's why we're gonna have fun with it. So it's okay, it's really, really. I think that's funny. It's over the top. It's funny. Unfortunately, I think the plot of this movie has way too many plot holes, which sucks because I do think there's actually a noir detective story in there that's charming.
Yeah, I actually didn't care too much to think about the plot holes in that much detail, because I went, it's a movie with puppets working with police officers. I'll buy it, whatever.
But the plot holes are glaring.
Oh, they are.
They
definitely are.
I also thought that they did some weird stuff in terms of the race allegory with puppets, and don't do enough with it.
Yeah, I think the reason I think it didn't work, and I think the reason it didn't work is because no one ever really. It's kind of just taken for granted that there's prejudice towards puppets.
Yeah, nobody goes into detail.
Yeah, exactly. No one ever asks why do you feel this way about me? Why is it like this?
Yeah, where does this
why is it always like this? Where does this come from?
What's the history of it? Because prejudice, even when it's skin color, racism and prejudice for religion or creed or skin color often comes from a history.
Exactly.
It's not so one-dimensional as to be you have a different skin color and ergo I'm racist. Sometimes it is that way. But there's often societally and culturally huge historical components to how that works, and I think it's sort of it's too simple to just be well, they're puppets.
Yeah, I agree. That was my biggest criticism for it's not my biggest criticism necessarily, but that was a big criticism for me.
Because I think if they were gonna lean into that, they could have made the whole story about puppet prejudice and used it as this hilarious allegory for real world racism if they leaned into it. Or they should have just left it as a couple of jokes where it's just like, oh, it's because I'm a puppet, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
just
exactly.
been like, oh, puppet racism, ha ha ha, it's okay because it's a joke.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was so built into the world and the fabric of the world, it only ever exists as a surface level thing.
Yeah.
And I thought that really brought the whole movie down because it seemed to be this thing that it's always there, it's always present, it affects everything, and yet none of the characters ever seem to like tackle it head on. And if you're gonna bring something up like that, I feel like you at least have to go, hang on a minute. You have to at least have it addressed on that level.
Yeah,
I believe
it's interesting because under the surface, it's like we're talking about puppet racism, and real world racism is kind of always prevalent, always there, and nobody addresses it. But I think in order to make the allegory work, you have to, because there aren't puppets in real life. So normally you could say, like, well, that's really, really smart, the fact that they didn't say anything about it, but it's so prevalent throughout the show. And my response to that would be like, yes, if you could make the point of it, the fact that nobody ever addresses it, that would work, except they're puppets.
Yeah,
if they were people, if we were dealing with actual racial differences and nobody ever talked about it, but it was apparent nobody was ever talking about it, then it would be like, oh no, maybe this is like actually how real life is. There is this prejudice here and it's so apparent, but nobody ever talks about it. And that's the point of the movie. But because they're puppets, we should talk about it, because otherwise the allegory is just puppets aren't people. We know they're not people. We've talked about this before with Bright.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that, yeah, Bright, there's actually, strangely, a lot of crossover with Bright.
Yeah, because the orcs in that were clearly supposed to be like African American, or black diasporic people in the United States, and yet the orcs are a different like species almost. So that's why that didn't work. And this isn't kind of in the same way. It's like, but because they're puppets, now they didn't try to make them explicitly African American or black, which I think works in this movie's benefit, which didn't work for Bright. But it's like, it's funny, but you don't do anything with it.
Yeah, I think it's not so much for me that it needed to be explicit that this is what was going on. Like, oh, we're talking about racism. It was more the fact that they're like, oh, there's prejudice, but we're not actually going to. It's there, but it's not really going to play any role in the development of the story. Everyone's just going to be shitty to these characters, and they're just going to kind of roll with it for the entire movie.
Yeah.
Because in terms of like talking about race, there are movies. I was trying to think. I can think of one example of a movie where it's very much it deals with race, but it's not explicit, or maybe it's more explicit than I think it is. And it's this really random movie that if any of our listeners have heard of this movie, I will be your best friend. It's called Symbiosis-Psychotaxiplasm, Take 1.
Whoa, Gesundheit.
Oh yeah, say it with me. Symbiosis-Psychotaxiplasm, Take 1. It's a documentary it was originally filmed in 1968, but wasn't released until 1992, I believe. Basically, it's an experimental documentary by a black filmmaker, and the whole movie it's very strange because it's a movie about making a movie, but the making of the movie becomes the movie that you're watching. Yeah. But then on top of that, throughout it is sort of weaved these questions of like, well, who's really in charge? What's going on here? And
sounds like an episode of Community.
Well, it is, but it's real life. Well, sort of. This is the thing. At a certain point, you go, what's real? What? How much am I watching is actually real? Like, what's the real and what's the acting? So it deals with that level, but then with that, all the character, like the people in it, there are conversations about like who's in charge, who's running the show, who gets authority, and then there's this, and then at the very end, the black filmmaker, he's like, like what we're doing here right now is we basically exist in a system. Like when we make a movie, he doesn't say this, and I'm sort of extrapolating on it a little bit, but he basically says movies themselves have an inherent power structure, and sort of everybody on set asking questions about who's in charge reflects something about, and he's in response to the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
So it's basically a movie that's very much about being black in America.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It's not like explicitly like talking
really
about that. So that's a case where I think like race is very much a part of the movie, but it's not explicitly talked about.
Yeah.
Now that's in terms of how that would intersect with this.
Yeah.
It's in terms of how that would intersect with this, I don't know, because I'm talking about an experimental documentary versus a comedy with puppets. My other things with this movie. I mean, I just think I love the dark humor. Another movie it reminded me of was Meet the Feebles.
I don't know that
It's
one.
Peter Jackson's second movie.
Okay.
It's basically like a dark Muppets.
Yeah.
So I had similar vibes with this. I liked the puppetry. I believed the puppets as characters. Like I believed them as I actually just on some level and felt invested in them, even though I thought the story was generic and the characters were flat. I actually found the puppets like quite lively and believable
and fun
as
to watch.
animated characters. Yeah.
Whenever the detective Phil runs and you see his legs, it looks good. And legs are hard to do on puppets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why. Like normally, whenever you see a puppet, it's usually shot from the waist up, right? So we don't see their torso, or it's shot where you can see the actor puppeteering, but the illusion is that we only interact with the puppets. That's very common on stage, right? Where the actors are dressed in black and we don't other characters don't interact with the actors themselves, just the puppets. And that helps with suspension of disbelief. But to see Phil's legs when he's running and be like, it looks good, man.
Yeah, I agree. I think the puppeteering work is top notch.
Yeah. The crazy amount of work that must have gone into that.
I know. And well, I was thinking too, like in terms of how you plan your shots, there seemed to be, my guess is there were different kinds of puppets they used.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hero props.
Yeah, but it's like you would really have to plan out how you're gonna set that up and stage your scenes that way. And I think they did a good job with that.
Yeah.
I think where it falls short really is it's I know it's supposed to be like the whole thing is it's a film noir detective but with puppets, but I still felt like it was really generic.
Yeah.
In terms of the story, and it didn't. I think it relied too much on crass humor to make up for the fact that the characters were really flat and one-dimensional, and that there wasn't really an interesting story.
I felt like there could have been an interesting story there, but I felt like the movie spends too long doing the crass humor, which is funny, but it spends too long on those jokes. Like, I bet you if you split up the runtime, you'd find that the actual amount of time they spent doing crass jokes was like 15 whole minutes of this movie's runtime.
Right.
And that means you don't have a lot of time to explore like emotional, because I felt like the emotional journey that Philip and Connie go on, that's Melissa McCarthy's character, the emotional journey that these two characters go on is there, but it's weak.
Yeah,
it doesn't land very well. It feels very contrived. It's like, okay, now they're in the car together, so we're gonna get this reconciliation moment. Like, it's coming. Whereas like I think Who Framed Roger Rabbit has some twists in it that really work because it takes its story seriously. Who Framed Roger Rabbit could have been without cartoons, and still would have worked as a decent detective noir. It wouldn't have been that revolutionary, but it would have been a decent detective noir.
Yeah.
You throw the tunes in there, and now you have something really extraordinary.
Yeah. That's interesting that you bring up that, because I was thinking of another movie that plays on the detective genre trope for comedic effect well, is Detective Pikachu.
Yeah.
Detective Pikachu does it really well, and it's actually there's I think you have this whole world building element in Detective Pikachu like you do here, but there's a way in which like you get this it's really about a relationship, like it's a father-son relationship, and that's what's really underneath it. And so the whole Detective Pikachu and the main character, that's what's ultimately being resolved, and it's quite touching actually by the end, the way it resolves.
I also,
whereas in this, Oh, go ahead.
I also really liked in Detective Pikachu, how you talk about it, it's a world building thing. In this, I felt like whenever they dealt with puppets, it was like they're going to the puppet parts. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like occasionally we get like the scene at the beach where we see the puppets and the people together. But in Detective Pikachu, every part of the city has Pokemon integrated into it. In backgrounds, in back alleys, everything has Pokemon everywhere. It's visually glorious. They look so good. Yeah. And in this, I felt like it would have been a lot of work to do. And when they're out in public, you do see puppets everywhere, but it doesn't change the city the same way that Pokemon had. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The world building was just like, oh, we're in regular day to day now, except there's puppets around. Whereas in Detective Pikachu or in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it felt like the cartoons were part of the world and had affected it. The Pokemon had changed effectively the course of how we developed in order to like live with Pokemon. Same with the tunes. Whereas it didn't feel this way with the puppets.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too with this, where I felt the big question I had was, maybe I missed something, but I never understood why, if Melissa McCarthy and the Phil character, so yeah, Edwards and Phil were so close before, and then there was this accident.
Oh, the accident makes no sense. Makes no sense.
And then why she would decide, like, because part of the backstory is she basically blames him for intentionally missing.
But it doesn't make any sense because he shoots, misses, and then the whole thing is like puppets won't shoot other puppets. Except in that process, he accidentally hit another puppet.
Yeah, and I found that really confusing. But I didn't understand why Edwards would suddenly would suddenly be antagonistic towards him. Yeah. Given this circumstance, and that would be the basis for their animosity.
I think I fixed that in my pitch. My pitch.
Yeah.
But that was one of the big things
one thing for me
that I had to like fix in my pitch. Like I spent a lot more time than normal thinking about how to make this story work, because I was like, let's keep all the crass humor, but in order to make this a better movie, the story has to work. That's what's going to elevate this movie. If it takes itself seriously in its story department, but then is totally not serious in its crass sexual humor.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it doesn't even, like, that was the way I approached it too. I basically leaned into the serial killer genre.
Yeah.
And was like, if you take any of those movies as they are and put puppets in them, like take Silence of the Lambs
and put puppets
and turn Hannibal Lecter and the guards protecting him into puppets.
Oh my God! Can we just do that as like a short skit?
Like, it's now hilarious.
I think we should do that as a short skit. That would be hilarious.
It's because you take the scene at the end where he breaks out and he like disembowels the guy, and it's like a puppet up with like fluff hanging out. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay,
that's inherently funny.
Really dark. You could do it shot for shot with puppets, and it's funny. So the whole thing is, you don't even necessarily need to like inject crass humor into it for it to be funny, because if you do it like a quote unquote serious movie with puppets, it's just going to be funny.
Yeah. I can just imagine like a puppet who eats other puppets.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's just inherently funny. Like, and they call him the puppet monster.
Yeah.
Me love to eat other puppets. Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah, so I mean, for my pitch, I basically just did stuff like that.
Can you imagine?
Like, oh, that's great.
You've got me thinking about this now. Can you imagine she like shows up, and you know the famous scene where he's like, I ate him with some fava beans and Chianti?
Yeah,
does that
exactly.
Thing. Can you imagine if it was Cookie Monster and he was like,
me eat with chocolate chips and glass of milk.
it's not scary anymore. I'd watch that. That's funny.
Exactly. So my whole point with that is, in terms of like tone, it's more or less the same tone. All you like in terms of approaching it, you would approach it as you would any other cop drama to make that drama work. And then just at the back of your mind, oh yeah, this character is a puppet. It's just gonna be fucking funny because we have a puppet. Yeah.
So the twist at the end, did you get that Sandra was going to be the girl who had her dad killed? Did you care? Did it matter?
I honestly kind of switched off for most of
plot,
the movie.
yeah.
I was actually, okay, this is, because we're doing color correction right now for Broken Courage, I was paying more attention to the color choices, going, oh, okay.
That's just where your head was at. Yeah.
That's just where my head's at. So I really wasn't, I was basically paying attention to story on like a minimal level.
Because the switch for me, I kind of did see coming. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I know where they're going with this.
Yeah.
What I didn't like is at the end when Kristen Wiig's character comes back, Jenny, and they don't explain how, like, I was like, okay, it's crazy that you came back, but also how did you come back? Because that car exploded.
You mean Elizabeth Banks?
Yeah, Elizabeth Banks.
Elizabeth Banks? Yeah.
Is that
okay? Yeah. How
Elizabeth
did?
Banks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said Kristen Wiig.
Oh, not Kristen Wiig. No, Elizabeth Banks. When her character comes back, and she just exploded in a car, and I was like, "You're just gonna not explain that? Like, I need something, guys."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought that was. I questioned that too. I was waiting for the shot of as he turned his back around, she got out of the car and booked it and then put a dummy in. Yeah.
I think
something really ridiculous like that, where they somehow put a dummy in while he had his back turned.
That's exactly what I think. What if it was a dummy, but not a dummy, a puppet?
Oh,
just add another layer there. Like they
go.
put a puppet of her in, and they're like, "That's fucked up. You had a puppet of yourself made. That's fucked up." Yeah, man. I don't know. There's some things in there that I think would have been fun to explore because there's so much emphasis on sex. Where the fuck do puppets come from? Do they procreate like we do?
Well, that was another thing too. That would be hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. There was one really, really good line that I did like, and it's when they're breaking him out. She shoots Phil Edwards, and they're breaking him out, and she has the chloroform and turns to the paramedic and just goes, "Does this smell like chloroform?" That's a good line. Yeah. That was funny. I like that one.
Yeah. Like there were some moments in it where I went, okay, no, that's funny.
That was funny.
I think the bits where I laughed the most was the sex scene in Phil's office.
That was
which we talked
gratuitous, but funny.
When they find the puppet washed up under the bridge.
Goober.
That was, and I also there was some one of the scenes where what was it? Never mind. I've totally lost it.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah,
there was another moment where I went, yeah, that's good.
Those are the big ones for me because I actually felt like the closer we got to the climax, the less funny this movie got.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. There were a lot less jokes.
There were a lot less jokes, and I know you have to sort of sober up emotionally, but I was really ready for you got to give me your biggest jokes at the end, man. Make the show funny all the way through. And there were some times where I felt like it was just shock humor.
Yeah,
like the cow in the porn shop. Doing the milking the cow to make his own homemade porn.
Funny.
It's funny, but it's also oh man, that's a lot.
It was. I had the same reaction. I was like, okay, that's funny. This is because it's right up at the front of the movie. Like, oh, this is where this movie's going. Okay,
that's the way. So originally, for our listeners, I had planned to do this movie with Alyssa. And not that I don't think Alyssa could handle it, but I just don't know that she would have. You and I enjoy a certain amount of crude humor. I don't know that Alyssa would have appreciated this. And that was the scene with the eight tentacle reach around hand job on a cow. That I was like, oh, I don't think this is the kind of movie that Alyssa's going to appreciate.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So, and she told me, she was like, if you don't think I'll like it, then please don't make me watch it. And I was like, that's fair. But yeah. So my big thing is there's just a couple things in the story that it should have really taken itself a little bit more seriously in that respect, because the plot really kind of frustrates me. Even the twist where Sandra's the little girl, that actually kind of worked. There's other parts that I was like, come on, why? The whole thing where Sandra sets him up to go to the porn shop. And the only reason that he goes to the porn shop is because there's the letter P in the magazine, and that sends him to the porn shop. That's way too tenuous.
Oh, it's very, when you really start to think about it and break it down, it's very convoluted.
Yeah.
And then also so that he's there at the same time that Bunny's there.
Yeah. That Bumbly Pants is there. So and obviously
Oh,
she
that-
was
yeah,
there 'cause she was
yeah,
trying
the-
to set him up. There's too much that's coincidence.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, which is why I was like, okay, yeah, you just, my reaction was, okay, you just turn that off and go, okay, whatever,
Yeah.
it's puppets. But it's still, but you're right, like, it's still, it could have been tighter, and it still would have been funny. It still would have worked, and probably would have worked better, even if, like, if you got invested in the mystery. Because I actually wasn't invested in the mystery.
But imagine
at
if
all.
you'd
I was
had been,
just
if
like,
this was a
yeah,
funny
exactly.
thing. Like when
Yeah.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you're like, arguably Who Framed Roger Rabbit is not as funny as this movie. I still think it's funny, and it's great how they play with the, but you're invested almost from the word go.
Right.
Like I don't know, man. Eddie shows up at Cartoon Saloon. No, not Cartoon Saloon. At the Maroon Cartoons to like investigate, and already they treat it like a noir, right? They do the voiceover. They do. I don't know, man. It's just. I also thought maybe they could have done, because it was puppets, they could have done more noir shots, not the black and white coloration, but sort of the close-ups, the lighting. Because I was also a little confused, like. Maybe that was too stylistic to have puppets and do a noir. Maybe they thought it was too stylistic. But I was also like, what year is this supposed to be? Because at times it feels like it's supposed to be the 80s. But at other times I was like, is this modern day? Like I wanted to see them do the noir. Can you imagine doing like the close-up with the lighting through the classic shaded curtains on a pair
blinds.
of on a pair of googly eyes, because some fucking puppet is just like a detective who has googly eyes? Like, that's funny.
Yeah, I was expecting it to go full like Chinatown.
Yeah.
That's what I was like, oh, this is just going to be like Chinatown with puppets.
Yeah, so
And, like you basically, like I think that's kind of what I did with my pitch. Is I basically was like, what are movies that you could just kind of parody
with puppets,
and you just mashed them together?
Yeah.
Like what? Like take all your favorite detective, psychological thriller movies, mash them together, but put it with puppets.
And that's already, I think, really, really funny. I think the biggest sort of flaw with this, hit my microphone, got excited. The biggest sort of flaw I have with this movie, and this isn't to strike against it, is that it feels like they were like, let's hire a puppet company and we'll do a Saturday Night Live sketch into a full movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think
it does feel like
and
that.
I think they had some really, really neat ideas for the comedy skit part, but I think it was too long to do as like a full movie.
Yeah,
without a little bit more thought. As a skit, like, or as a series of skits on a Saturday Night Live episode, like a 15-minute or 30-minute long special episode with puppets, this would have been awesome. And you couldn't do it live because the puppets wouldn't have worked that well. But this would have been awesome, because who gives a shit on Saturday Night Live if the plot doesn't work? But if you're gonna give me a movie and give me a full-length feature movie, I do care. Call me stupid for caring, but I do care.
Well, I mean, your audiences would get bored. Like, you can't sustain a movie on laughs alone for an hour. And
well, unless
30
it's
minutes.
Jackass, but somehow they defy.
Yeah, true.
critique.
There are exceptions. I suppose, like, Monty Python and the Holy Grail doesn't really.
It has
have
a plot.
So
It has a
kind
plot.
of. Yeah, I suppose.
I would argue that Meaning of Life has less of a trajectory than Holy Grail.
I would agree. Meaning of Life is a bunch of random vignettes loosely connected to each other.
Yeah.
Like very loosely connected to each other.
But like Life of Brian,
I
will tell you, like I will agree, Life of Brian has far more of an arc than the Holy Grail does. But
exactly, yeah. Life of Brian has a very it has a story, and
it's one that everybody knows. It's an easy story to tell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't say
Holy
everybody.
Grail.
Western audiences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Holy Grail has like semblances of a story. I think it's just at a certain point it just falls apart.
They just give up on it, right? The police show up and arrest everybody.
Yeah, it's like end of movie.
Yeah, which is a great ending. But
it's awesome. Yeah.
Should we get into our pitches?
Yeah, let's do that.
Would you like to start, or would you like me to?
Sure. Mine. So mine's a little loose. Like I mentioned, mine's basically, I just sort of thought of, what if you just took that idea? What if you just took movies like Seven, Silence of the Lambs, Chinatown, mashed them all together, but did it with puppets?
Now I'm
That's
imagining a
essentially
severed puppet head in a box, like a Jack in the Box.
yeah, exactly. I wish I'd thought of that. That's so good.
No, but I'm definitely like the pun definitely intended, but you should just stuff it in there.
Yeah,
Stuff it in somewhere in your pitch.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
All right, hit me
that
with
in
it.
here. Okay, so basically, I would do it more from Edwards, who's played by Melissa McCarthy. I'd do it more from her perspective.
Okay.
And basically, it would start off with her showing up at the porn shop. But you'd play it like, you know, she's being called to this like violent crime scene. Like, oh, there were like 4 fatalities. Murderer got away. It's a mess. This shows up. You know, the police cars are there. Sirens are going off.
And you play it like super
There's
great.
crime scene tape. Yeah. You know, there's like a chalk drawing on the sidewalk somewhere outside, but it's like loosely humanoid. And then you walk into the porn shop and it's like there's fluff everywhere. And you're like, oh, okay, the puppets were murdered. Oh, but everyone's treating it so seriously. But she'd be a little bit more competent. I did feel like the Melissa McCarthy cop character wasn't actually a very competent police officer.
Good character.
No.
not
So
well
I
written.
was like, okay, actually I'd make her basically the chief like driving character in my version. So she shows up and Phillips is there and she goes, Phil Phillips is there and she goes, oh, like, what are you doing here? I haven't seen you in a long time. What's going on? And he basically explains like, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm a witness. And basically we get the sense that we find out that he was a police officer, but he left the police force.
Yeah.
And she just hasn't seen him in a long time.
Yeah.
So it's not so much that there's animosity between them. He's just sort of gone.
Yeah.
And now she's like, like, how are you doing? How have you been? But he kind of keeps his distance. And she's now the one who's assigned to solve this case. In the way I'd also see it too is no one's overtly hostile towards puppets. Like no one's actually like, oh, these puppets are stupid.
Yeah.
Like it's more of that, like they kind of get the cold shoulder, but it's not in your face. Like,
That's
oh, we hate
systemic
puppets.
racism, not that overt racism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so Edwards is basically like she's doing the investigating on her own, and she knows that Phil knows something, but Phil is reluctant to get involved because he left the police force years ago, and she also knows that she's figured out that he's a private investigator now, so he has other clients, but in all of her attempts to get him ask him what he knows, he's always like, no, I'm not going to help you, like fuck the police, basically, is
Fuck
his
the
attitude.
police.
Yeah. Anyway, she figures out that so then there's another murderer, and then she goes, oh, okay, this is also someone who's a cast member of the Happytime murderers. Okay, so now there's a pattern.
Yeah.
What's going on? And then with this one as well, Phil was also at the scene of the crime, and so now, because she's the one doing the investigation, she's interrogating him essentially, and she's like, okay, what's going on? Like, they're both Happytime cast members, they're both dead. You knew the Happytime cast because your brother was in the show. So like, tell me, like, what's going on? And she basically says like, look, it's not looking good for you right now, but if you can agree to help me out, I can get you out of this situation, but I'm gonna need your cooperation. So he basically at that point he's like, okay, fine, whatever. Like, I need you to know that I'm innocent, and fine, whatever, I'll help you out. And then in here, his brother is killed, and he's like, look, I don't care about helping you, but I do want, I'm gonna help. I just want to bring this person to justice.
Yeah.
That's what I want. So they go around, I just said, my note was they go around picking up clues, detective shit.
Yeah.
Oh, and then they figure out that, this is the work of a puppet serial killer. And it's like the puppet serial killer who Phil actually caught years ago.
Ooh.
And it seems like this person is now back at large and is now going after cast members of the Happytime murderers.
Yeah.
So as we go along and we spend more time with them solving the mystery, maybe in one of them they like go out to, like, the third member dies and they get a phone call like saying like, oh, you'll have a package waiting for you in this field somewhere, and they go and get it and it's a box, and they open the box and there's a head stuffed in the box.
Well done.
Yeah. As we go along, we learn that Phil left the police force because he felt like the police were actually a very corrupt institution, and then they created more problems and solved them. And he believes that the police actually, he was very frustrated because he felt that they turned a blind eye towards crime, not just towards puppets, but towards crime in general. But he knows it happening towards puppets. And what happened with the puppet serial killer was he actually caught the serial killer, brought the serial killer in, but the judge let him go because the judge felt like that they didn't have enough adequate evidence to prove that this was the serial killer, but it actually was the serial killer. And it's this really comical flashback where it's like the evidence is obvious that this person actually was the serial killer, but the judge is like, oh, no. It's like this person's innocent. Anyway, he's basically over time he's adopted a very defiant attitude, and he's asking police force why is it like this, why aren't we fixing anything? And they just tell him no, don't ask questions, just do your job, you're a badge, just do what you got to do. And one day he quits, and the scene is as he's leaving, I'm not the puppet, you're all the ones who are puppets, you just do what you're told. And then he walks out.
You're all fucking puppets.
Yeah, exactly. They find another victim. It'd be one of them was sitting at a table and was fed too much food and got too bloated, got overly stuffed, and exploded. Anyway. But in each of them they find that parts of some of the felt is missing. And then around this time, they hear that there's actually their next victim has been kidnapped. The next member of the cast has been kidnapped. Okay. Then it cuts to this basement of the serial killer, and then we do the Silence of the Lambs thing with the Buffalo Bill. It rubs but in this it rubs the conditioner on its skin, or else it gets the hose again. And it's a puppet in this hole. No, let me out. And I'll kill your dog.
Amazing.
So they're basically trying to catch this. Basically, it's the Buffalo Bill character in Silence of the Lambs. They basically at a certain point they get separated or whatever. One of them goes off to go investigate. There's a lead they have, and it's I'll go check out this lead that's not going to go anywhere. Turns out that's actually the lead that's actually the serial killer. Yeah. And then anyway, Phil goes off on her own, and what Edwards discovers is that the serial killer is actually is trying to basically the plan is to make a felt skin that he can wear like the Buffalo Bill character in Silence of the Lambs, but the last person on his list is Phil.
Ooh.
Phil is the last character, and Phil is actually on his way right now to the house of the serial killer. But he doesn't know it. He thinks this is just some random lead.
Don't go in there, Clarice.
Edwards is like, hey, I figured this out, and tries to get all the police on board. And but then she runs into the issue that Phil ran into, where they're like, no, don't worry about it. It's hey, Phil's okay. Don't you just he's a private investigator. Why do you care about him? We found out that he's innocent. Okay, you fine, it's a serial killer, but we can't send a whole police force to go rescue him. Anyway, she then also discovers somewhere in here where actually the serial killer, there's actually like a secret like league of elites that are all basically like they have these personalities, these destructive, conniving personalities where they actually like do evil things to puppets, and they're a secret society. And so, but it's like judges and police and politicians, and they know about this serial killer, but they're actually like protecting the serial killer. And so like one of the judge that let him off was part of this secret society. So she's like, oh, I gotta go and rescue Phil on my own. So she goes to the house, and it's played like Silence of the Lambs at the very end when Clarice is in the house, but this time it's Phil in the house. And so whenever it cuts to like the night vision goggles, you see Phil the puppet looking around with this revolver. Anyway, finally at the end, in my version, instead of Phil shooting him, what happens is Edwards just basically like crashes down the door, and then all the light floods in so that he can't like his night vision goggles like
white out,
blind him, and then he just like falls into that pit or whatever. Anyway, she rescues him, and then what they do is they do the reveal, because we haven't actually seen, like, the serial killer has always had like a mask on or something, and they do the like, okay, who's the serial killer? It's like the Scooby-Doo reveal, and it was the producer of the Happytime Murders TV show, Happytime Cast TV show. And basically he's part of this, like, all these elites, these movie producers and judges and politicians are all part of this group that basically, like, exploit puppets for their own amusement.
Damn. That's good, though. I like how much you make fun of like classic movies, except with puppets.
Yeah, that's it. That's essentially it. It's a little messy, but those are kind of like the main points that I would sort of do. But a lot of it's more like...
I think you're right. Like the idea of doing like, let's just do Silence of the Lambs, but with puppets, because that's just going to be funny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you take the classic scenes from other movies and you just mash them all together. So
into a cohesive story.
Into a cohesive story, and then you do it with puppets. Yeah, and that's just funny.
Yeah. Mine follows the actual story or the actual original movie a little bit closer, but I tried to like see if I could sort through some of the shit. So the movie starts out with the same way. Phil returns to his office from his car, and Sandra White shows up to explain that she's been receiving death threats. So Phil is about to go investigate, like, on her case, when he gets a call, and it turns out that his brother's been murdered. So here we get a little bit of backstory that his brother was part of this he's an up-and-coming star, big shot deal, the Happytime gang was his first sort of big break into the world of stardom, which is a big deal for puppets, because it was a sort of the first show where puppets had a part, you know what I mean?
Right.
So Phil heads out, and when he sees this scene, we can get that sort of fluff thing that you talked about, where they're like in his house, but there's like fluff everywhere, but everyone's treating it like super serious, like, which I just think is hilarious. So at the crime scene, we also get Detective Edwards, and immediately Phil and her seem to like he hates her. He's like, oh, you're fine. And she's like not impressed with him either. They just immediately, it turns out we find out that they used to be partners. He used to be on the force, but that Phil basically ruined his career as a police puppet. But he's basically, I didn't do anything. I don't have any part of it. I just came to see if it was my brother and whatnot. And then the lieutenant tells Phil to go home, but he's like, I'm going to start looking into my brother's murder. So we get a little bit more backstory about his brother, who was, part of the Happytime gang. And before Phil starts looking into, basically he makes a stop at the producers and who would do anything like this? He makes a stop at his brother's agent. Who would have anything to do like this to try and get at my brother Larry? And Larry's manager basically says that the Happytime gang was about to become syndicated, and there was a flat rate. It wasn't like they were going to get paid over time. It was a flat rate of like $1 million split between each of the members or their kin. However, if there was no kin left, it would be split between the remaining members. So before looking into the rest of the cast, Phil decides he's gonna make a stop. So he stops off at Lena's place, and so this is a brand new character, but sort of the Elizabeth Banks character.
Oh, okay.
But her name is Lena. She works at a strip club where he finds her as a dancer, and she was the longtime partner of Larry's.
Oh, okay.
And she used to be on the show as well, but she was a longtime partner of Larry's, and he explains that Larry passed away, and she hasn't seen Larry in years. They actually broke up while he was she was on the show, and then got fired. Larry kept going and was like this huge big shot, and that started his career, but Lena got fired. But the two of them were together until he broke up with her because he was a sort of a rising star and she wasn't going anywhere. And Lena's a human, by the way. So they had to keep their relationship pretty hush-hush. And nobody had any idea for a long time.
Okay.
And then Larry was like, "Oh, I'm going to leave. I don't want anything to do with you. Like, it's, bad news." So Lena, that's what happened to Lena. So immediately Phil basically tells her, and she's a little shaken up by this because, yeah. So immediately Phil starts looking into the rest of the cast, but while he's looking, he keeps bumping into Detective Edwards. So the pair wind up looking into Lyle, who's the sort of the drug runner. And in this version, Edwards doesn't have a puppet liver, but it's clear that she was once addicted to smack.
Oh, okay.
Right? So she's recovering. So she doesn't, you can tell, there's a couple times where she wants to do it. She was an addict and will always be an addict, but is now sober for something like 10 years.
Right.
So, but you can tell she struggles with it. But the whole fight scene can play out the same way, and then the car shows up and blows Lyle's stuffing out. So the lieutenant rolls up and basically says that he wants to bring Phil on as a consultant because Phil has the most experience with puppet murders as opposed to regular homicides.
Right.
So he basically pairs Phil with Edwards up. So the pair go and hit up Bumbly Pants at a local porn shop, and while Edwards is in the back, Phil gets into a gunfight with a mysterious assailant, and he misses. And when Edward comes from the back, she makes a couple of jabs about the fact that he missed, and it was probably another puppet. So we find out that when the two were working on a case, this is from Edward's point of view, she had a gun in her and shot, and she missed. And we'll leave it at that for now. Yeah, and she missed, and this is sort of the point where all this contention seems to be coming from, but we don't know why yet. So Phil goes to find Jenny. So Jenny was one of the other members. She replaced Lena. So when Lena got fired, Jenny was hired on.
Okay.
Yeah. Where am I? Did I miss a part? Sorry.
That's okay.
Oh yeah, sorry. He goes to find Lena, and basically Lena's like this big shot, star now. She also went on to become a huge star, and she's was the biggest out of all of them. She went on to be this huge. He walks her back to her trailer after asking her some questions, and she basically well, I wasn't on from the beginning, but I don't really need the money, so I don't know why I would be in any kind of danger. And he walks her back to her trailer after she's done shooting, and as he's leaving, the trailer explodes.
Oh.
So he's pretty shaken by that. But he goes to visit Lena again, who calls him up, and he goes to visit Lena, and she basically is like, I think I want to talk a little bit about what happened. And it turns out, Lena says that the reason she and Larry broke up wasn't because Larry was a big-time star who was on the rise. It was because Lena broke up with him. Larry just spun it that way. She broke up with him, and she broke up with him because she didn't want to bring him down because she got pregnant and never told him. And that's why she left. So, yeah. But the FBI is basically now taking an interest in all this because when Jenny, the human, died in the car bombing, the trailer bombing, now all of a sudden a human's involved and the FBI give a shit.
Right.
Whereas before it was all puppets and they didn't give a shit. So they would think that because Phil is the only person who was in all of the places when the murders happened, that he's like, they want to frame him because he also happens to be Larry's brother, which means he would get the money. He's kin. He would get the money if the other members were dead.
Right.
So it's like, oh shit. So when Phil shows up, like he's on the lam now, he shows up at Edwards. Edwards is hesitant. She wants to call it in. And Phil is like, yo, you can't fucking do me like that again. Right? You like we were working well together again after what happened before. So it turns out in the past what had happened is Edwards was supposed to take the shot that would save Phil when he had a gun to his head, and she missed because she was high on smack.
Okay, interesting.
And what happened is the FBI showed up and basically said, we know Edwards is on smack, but we don't want a puppet cop. And so they made Larry take the fall for it, and Edwards said nothing.
I see.
She did, however, clean herself up. So she's not on smack anymore. But she basically, like, the reason he hates her is because she helped him take the fall for missing when something was going down, when it was actually her. So the story is that he took the shot and missed while the gun was to her head, but in fact it was the other way around.
Right. Interesting.
So she's sort of guilty. She's like, well, I don't know. Like, did you actually do it? And he's like, yo, I wouldn't fucking do that. And you need to, like, you got to have my back. And, yeah. So that fucking happened. Sorry. So the two of them decide that they're going to go see the last two cast members because that'll help clear Edward's doubt and it'll clear Phil's name. So, but before they can do that, Phil's like, I got to go pick something up from my office. And Edwards doesn't really trust him. And she's like, okay, I'll wait in the car. And he's like, no, like it'll be faster if we go in, get it, and then get out. She's like, no, I'll wait in the car and I'll be a lookout. And he's like, okay. So he goes into his office and, his secretary basically says that Sandra, Miss White came back in and left some evidence for you. And he's like, fuck, I forgot I was supposed to be doing this case for Sandra, but then my brother got murdered. And he looks at it's in a briefcase and he doesn't get a chance to look at it because he's like, okay, I'll get it later. And then from the outside, we see Edwards is sort of on the fence about calling the FBI. And she's got a phone in her hand. And it cuts back to the inside of the office. And all of a sudden, the office explodes.
Oh.
Right? And Edwards is like, oh, shit. And she jumps out of the car and, like, pulls both Phil and the secretary out. And Phil is like, yo, what the fuck? Like, you didn't come into the office. Is it because you knew it was going to explode? And she's like, no, I wouldn't do you like that. And he's like, I don't know what you wouldn't fucking do. The FBI is trying to set me up for shit and whatnot. So, Phil and Edwards basically go out to where the last two people are. And they find out that they've already been murdered as well. And that's when the FBI shows up, takes them both in. And so Edwards basically is like, I have to try and figure out who to talk to now that the FBI is going to lock up. Who would want the money? Like somebody, even if somebody wasn't trying to kill you, which clearly they were, like, you know, why would they all go, like, all of this is just because of, like, some stupid, like, puppet racism. And this sparks something in Phil about racism and how people treat puppets in the public eye. And he tells Edwards about how Lena had a kid with Larry. And that the shame of having a puppet child and whatnot. Larry never knew, but if the kid knew that Larry was their father, they would be entitled to the money.
Oh.
Right? So Edwards basically, like, rushes over to find Lena because Phil's still locked up and asks if the child ever reached out or because of the money or anything like that, or anyone weird ever reached her. And Lena basically says that she was approached by a strange woman named Sandra.
Right.
And Edwards has no idea who this is, but goes and tells, like, Phil about it. And Phil is like, oh, Sandra is my client. Like, Sandra White's my client. And it was probably the evidence case that left the bomb in my office.
Right. Yes.
The same kind of explosion that killed Jenny in her trailer.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so they're basically like, holy shit, Sandra White is Larry's daughter and also Phil's niece.
Yeah.
And so they basically break they break Larry out. They can do the same way with, does this smell like chloroform? Because that's fucking funny. They wind up stopping Sandra in a situation, but this time Phil has a gun to his head and Edwards shoots without even hesitating because she's off the smack, and she gets a clean shot, and everyone is all safe and free. And the only person who's still alive who's related to any member of the Happytime gang is Phil.
Phil, right.
And so he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with all this money. And the last shot is of Lena in her like sort of rundown apartment, and she opens the door and there's a box with a note on top, and the note says, "Look after yourself, Phil." And she opens the box, and it's the $1 million.
Oh, nice. Bravo.
Yeah. See, I think you could still have all the sex stuff happen. The only thing that I couldn't have happen was because of the way that I set it up is we couldn't do the sex thing with Sandra and. I
mean, I guess you still could.
It'd just be weird because he had sex
really
with his niece.
Fucked up, but
That's fucked up.
I feel like you kind of should.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that'd be kind of. I guess it is a raunchy comedy, so why the fuck?
So
not?
then when that reveal happens, it's like, what?
What you had sex with your niece? Well, I didn't know she was my niece. That's fucked up, dude. Yeah, I guess that still would be pretty funny, and it would fit the tone of the movie.
Yeah,
But I was like,
exactly.
I want to do all that raunchy stuff, but I want to focus on making the plot work. And it's a little rough.
No,
but
that's
I think
good.
Overall, you get the twists work a little bit better.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much else to say about this movie. It's funny. I wish it was better. The puppeteering is amazing. It was probably so expensive to make, which is probably why they don't make puppet movies like this very much, like action puppet movies. But they really should, because this was wonderful. Yeah,
I know. It's very rare when you get to see puppets. I mean, I guess Muppets kind of brought it back for a bit, but I liked the adult angle on it. You should definitely check out Meet the Feebles, because that's very much, but it's like I said, it's like Muppets for adults. It's like adult
that's what
Muppets.
Avenue Q is, right? Avenue Q is one
right.
of my favorites.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's basically just like, what if Sesame Street but for adults? And this is less like Sesame Street for adults because it doesn't have the same themes. Avenue Q is literally set up like it's supposed to be teaching lessons the way Sesame Street would, except to adults. Things like how to deal with coming out, homelessness, your purpose. You know what I mean? The first song is called Avenue Q, but before that, there's this little vignette where Princeton, the main character, sings, what do you do with a BA in English?
Yeah.
What is my purpose? You know what I mean? And he just sings this song about 4 years.
What do you do with a BA in English?
And lots of knowledge have given me this useless degree. Right?
Yeah.
I'm butchering the song, but I think that one's really, really clever. And I wish this was as clever as that, because I don't think it would have taken much to do that. I do really think that this was a SNL sketch that got so full of itself that it ran away from itself when it really could have been a solid movie.
I think they were counting on the just the humor alone to sustain it. I mean, I'll say that it's a movie I didn't skip. I actually didn't skip any.
Yeah, I didn't skip it. I was invested. It was funny.
I was invested enough to at least, I was like, okay, yeah, next joke. Okay, yeah, oh, that's funny. Okay, yeah, oh, next joke. Okay, yeah, that's funny.
When Sandra first showed up, I did write this down. When Sandra first showed up, because it's this classic noir, I wrote a joke. I said she's a femme fatale.
Oh.
It's okay. It's not my best work.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
Go to my website, www.nathanieldraper.com, or at Letterboxd at Draper Nate. Yes.
And you also let loose the name of the project you've been working on, so keep your eyes open, folks, for Broken Courage, because that'll be coming out soon to a film festival near you, hopefully. Yeah. You can catch my band Robot Philosopher anywhere you listen to awesome music. You can also check out our other channel, the CineMasters, for scripted content, and stick around here for lots of episodes, classic episodes every Friday and new episodes every Tuesday. So don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll never miss those, and it helps the channel. Thanks so much for chilling with us. This was a good one.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Peace.